We'll be starting very shortly, but just waiting for everybody to join this Zoom webinar. Okay, I think we should begin. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Peter Arndt, Executive Officer of the Catholic Justice and Peace Commission of Brisbane, and I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar at the start of National Recycling Week, Stepping Up in National Recycling Week. This is also NAIDOC Week. The theme for NAIDOC Week this year is always was and always will be, and reminds us that wherever we're joining this webinar from, we are on the country of the traditional owners and custodians who have had a long and lasting and intimate relationship with their country from the beginning. So we acknowledge them, whichever country you're on, and pay our respects to the elders of the present and those of the many generations past who've lived with their country and cared for it and been an intimate part of it in all that time. We have two speakers today, and our first speaker is David Tutty, who is the Executive Officer of the Social Justice Commission in the Catholic Diocese of Toowoomba. And we've invited David to speak to us about some of the key themes of Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, Laudato Si, and in particular, our management of resources, our use and consumption of resources, and what he's inviting us to, what he's challenging us to in terms of changing our lifestyles. So welcome, David. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Peter. Many thanks for this opportunity to support Clean Up Australia and this special week. And thank you for Liam for the work that you do in Clean Up Australia. I wish to offer a few faith reflections drawing on Laudato Si. 5 years ago, Pope Francis wrote this letter to the whole world. This letter looks at our interconnectedness with all of creation, and the Pope sees that this awareness is needed to guide the changes that we are required to make for a more sustainable future. Basically, Laudato Si is a call to change. It's a call to conversion because we have caused harm to the earth, because of the way we use and abuse the resources of the earth. The Pope calls for an ecological conversion. It's a phrase that Pope John Paul II used, but this ecological conversion is more than just environmental. For Pope Francis, a true ecological conversion always has a social approach, always has social implications and social responses. We need to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. this change, this conversion is what is needed. And it's about an openness to new insights, new awareness, and new growth. And I think the word openness is the critical part because it's about a choice. We need to change the way we relate to the earth and to those who are poor so that all have a sustainable future. Pope Francis offers us 3 clear steps for going about this change. He asks that we take reality seriously, that we draw on the relational insights from our faith tradition, and that we respond to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So taking reality seriously, drawing on relational insights, and then responding. So to take reality seriously, we need to admit that we have a major problem. We need to listen to the scientists and the people on the ground about issues like climate change, levels of pollution, contaminated water and soil, about rubbish accumulation, about non-biodegradable waste, and about a loss of biodiversity and a lower quality of life for all of us. All of these are but symptoms of a deeper crisis. The deeper crisis is really to do with spiritual. Our technological development has not been accompanied by a growth in human responsibility. The idea of unlimited growth needs to change. We need more regulation of the market, especially to do with resource use and the production of waste and how that is managed. Our ways of organizing ourselves needs to change. So that's about taking reality seriously. Pope Francis in Laudato Si also talks about the richness of the Christian tradition. So much of this tradition is about ways of relating, about what is life-giving and what is healing for the earth and for the poor of the earth and for all of us. In the Christian tradition, we use the word creation and not just nature. The word creation connects us to God and to God's hopes for fullness of life. Creation includes humans and especially humans in need, so that whatever solutions that we come up with for issues around environmental need to be sensitive to humans in need. So we need to grow in compassion and care and grow in a desire that the goods of the earth are for the benefit of all and not just for some. The Pope in Laudato Si also calls us to practical actions. Now, Liam is going to talk about the practical things that Clean Up Australia does, and I just want to say a few things that the Pope calls us to do. Our most important actions are to cultivate sound values and to make a selfless ecological commitment. For us who live in a wealthier country like Australia, it's all about our lifestyles, our consumption, and our waste. We need to learn how to be happy with less and not to buy into the rhetoric around the need for economic growth. This is only possible when we learn that everything we buy, there's a moral component to it. Buying is a moral act as well as an economic one. Laudato Si asks us to work on strategies. So this is the responses. The strategies to halt the harm that we're doing to creation and how we can grow in a culture of care. the Pope asks us to reduce emissions of carbon dioxide and other polluting gases, to protect existing fresh water sources, to protect biodiversity, and to protect human life now and for future generations. We need to challenge global inequality and change what the Pope calls structurally perverse international commercial relationships. Somehow, the way we've organized ourselves at the bigger picture as well as the local area, there's something that needs to change. So it's so that we care for those in need and we care for the earth. And this means that we need to recognize that we have generated a huge ecological debt because we've harmed the earth and we've created, if you like, a debt to the earth. Pope Francis asks us to work within NGOs and cooperatives. Now, Liam, who is going to speak in a moment, works for Clean Up Australia, and that's an NGO. And the Pope's asking us to work within organisations like this, one, to do something practical towards a cleaner and a healthier environment, but also to put pressure on governments so that we can achieve change. All of this can only happen when our spirit and our attitudes have changed. So we need some sort of spiritual response. We need to grow in a greater awe and wonder of creation. We need to experience something that takes us beyond ourselves. One concrete way that we can grow like this is to identify role models to follow. The Pope uses St. Francis of Assisi as our role model in Laudato Si. He draws on St. Francis because he sees that he has a real sense of connection to what is around him. He recognized that everything created comes from God and that he was connected to everything as a brother, as a human being in relation to everything. He cared for those who are vulnerable and poor. He lived a life of poverty with joy. The earth was his sister, to be treated with respect and care. So the Pope's drawn on St. Francis as a role model and talked about some of the qualities that we are called to copy, to live out in our own lives. Now, it's important that we look for role models in our own lives, in our own day. And there may be some in your own lives. There may be some that you know, but sometimes role models come in the form of an organisation. And one particular one is Clean Up Australia. If you read their webpage, they talk about an average Australian bloke as the founder. Someone like you and me, a fella called Ian Kiernan. Clean Up Australia is about finding practical ways to care for creation by focusing on cleaning up waste and advocating that we reuse and recycle products. An organisation can be a role model. Ian Kiernan may be a role model we choose. It's worth thinking about. It's important to be inspired by someone. Many thanks for this opportunity. Back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, David, for that informative sharing. And I know you talked about role models, and I can see some comments from David Thomas, talking about the sort of modelling that I assume you're doing, David, zero waste and becoming a minimalist. And that's wonderful to hear in response to the mess that we are making, the damage that we're causing on the earth by our overconsumption. And as you mentioned, David Tutty, there are organisations like Clean Up Australia which are trying to model a different way of managing our resources and our waste. And I'm so pleased to see that Clean Up Australia has a stepping up program that encourages us to do more than simply recycle our waste, but to reduce our waste, to reuse things and to create less waste altogether. So we're very pleased and privileged to have Liam Rankin, who is the Relationships Manager, Community Relationships Manager for Clean Up Australia, to share a bit more about what the Stepping Up program is all about. Thanks very much, Liam, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me and for your introduction. And before I begin, may I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm zooming in from down here in sunny New South Wales. And just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to come along. Now, I'm just about to share my screen so that hopefully we'll be able to have a look at this little presentation. So as both David and Peter were saying, my name's Liam and I'm from Clean Up Australia. And many of you, I hope, know or have interacted with Clean Up Australia in the past. We are one of Australia's largest environmental charities, and we inspire community groups, businesses, any local people all around the country to clean up, fix up and conserve the environment. And we do that by working with business, government, community groups, schools, you name it. We will work with them to get some positive outcomes for our environment. And the core thing that underpins all of that for us is the fact that we believe that everything is a valuable resource. We don't believe in waste. We think that there's something good in everything, and we have to transition away from this overconsumption lifestyle as we've sort of been discussing already this morning. Now most of you will probably know us for Clean Up Australia Day, our big day of action. Over the 30 years that Clean Up Australia has existed, over 18 million Australians have participated in the cleanup activity at some point in their lives, whether that's them as a kid at school or them now at work doing a business cleanup with their colleagues, whether that be their church group or their scouts group, you name it. 18 million over that time, which we're very, very pleased, very pleased to have that. As we were talking about before, was founded by Ian Kiernan. And this is a guy, just an average Aussie bloke who was actually out on a sailing competition, yacht racing. And as he was out racing, he noticed the extraordinary amount of rubbish that was in the waterways out there. And this was back in the 80s. And he sort of came back to Sydney after the race and thought, gee, I thought we loved our harbour. I thought it was this beautiful, pristine place that Sydney siders all love. When you actually get out onto the water, there is just so much stuff out there that shouldn't be there. So he then decided to get a couple of mates together and organise a cleanup of Sydney Harbour. And that's sort of where it all began 30 years ago. And now those couple of mates that were out at Sydney Harbour is now 18 million Australians, and does go to show, I think, the power of one person and what people can do, as David was talking about, if they are a leader or if they can find leaders and role models to model themselves off. One person can make a difference and can build this huge movement in their communities. So as we're talking about Clean Up Australia Day, each year over about 700,000 people get out to over 7,000 locations all around to collect huge amounts of waste. And we'll move on quite briefly, because one thing that I want to talk about today is going beyond cleaning up the rubbish that's there and actually reducing the amount of rubbish that ends up there in the first place. Myself, as David was saying, I'm the Community Relationship Manager at Cleanup, and it's my job to work with our community groups, youth groups, school groups, faith groups, you name it, all around the country to get involved with cleaning up, but also taking those steps beyond the cleanup day to actually reduce waste at the source and help tackle our waste challenges. So I would say there are three main things that people should be taking away from this about what I can do as an individual. Number one, you can take part in our Step Up campaign, which I'll talk a little bit about later. You can do an everyday cleanup or Clean Up Australia Day. Now, Clean Up Australia Day obviously is our biggest day, but we really encourage people to get out there every day and clean up, whether that be something like cleaning up just one-off any day of the year. We have many schools, churches, scouts groups that actually do recurring cleanups. So they might go out every week, every month to a place and really take a whole lot more care and attention to it. They might adopt a creek and do some regeneration and some planting with local land care groups. They might engage with local schools in their area to get the parents and the kids involved, get the kids' hands dirty, involved with it. So we really encourage people to not just take an action on the Clean Up Australia Day, but to get out there every day, because that's when we really start to see a difference, is when people make it a habit and make it a part of their everyday life, is getting out there and cleaning up. For our events, registration is completely free for any community group, school, youth group, faith group. The only people who have to pay are businesses who are doing it with their staff, and that payment helps cover the cost for those community groups, school groups and whatnot to be able to get it for free. And part of that registration, we send out materials like gloves, bags, all that sort of stuff so that people can actually get out there and clean up. All that we require of people is to find the location, to find somewhere in their community that needs a bit of TLC, to adopt it, and get their friends, family, colleagues, whoever to come out and join them to clean it up. And then we can assist with the rubbish disposal through our contacts in councils all around the country. So if you want to get involved with the cleanup, it's pretty straightforward. All you need to know is when and where you're going to clean up and who's going to be there with you. And you can go onto our website and do that for free, and we'll send out all the goodies to you. Then everyday cleanups we've already briefly spoken about, but this is, as David was saying, the overconsumption and the ecological debts that we have can't be solved in one day, and Clean Up Australia is very aware of that. Obviously, we love Clean Up Australia Day, but our challenges go far beyond one day of action, which is why we encourage people to get involved every day. But I would say the most exciting thing that people can do is to be part of our Step Up campaign. So what is this Step Up campaign we speak of? It is our core way of tackling Australia's waste challenges at the source. The Clean Up Australia Day, the everyday cleanups, they're great, but it deals with the litter that's already out there. If we really want to make a change, we have to stop it at the source. You can see here, Australians produce 540 kilos of household waste a year, which is over 10 kilos a week per person. So every person in Australia is producing 10 kilos of household waste a week, which is quite a staggering amount if you consider just how much of that waste is actually soft plastic stuff, like chip packets and cling wrap and plastic bags and whatnot. I mean, they weigh nothing. So to collect 10 kilos of that every week is a whole heap of stuff. That just really, really adds up. And we know that over 130,000 tonnes of that plastic waste ends up in the waterways each year, which obviously has huge detrimental impacts on our environment, which I don't think I need to go too much into. I think we probably have all seen photographs of things like birds and turtles and whatnot eating plastic because they think that it's food sources, and then starving to death because their stomachs are full from the plastic that they can't actually ingest any actual food, obviously has huge grave consequences. So this Step Up campaign helps us move towards a more circular economy, to get away from this linear economy, which is all about making something, buying it, using it once and chucking it away. We need to get back to a more circular economy where resources and things are actually valued, that we're not just over consuming with things like fast fashion, the huge single-use economy. When David was talking about the ecological debt earlier, this was the thing that I was thinking of, is that it takes, we use about 1.7 times the resources that the Earth can support, which means for all the resources that we use in 1 year, it takes over 1 year for the Earth to generate those resources. Time is against us on this front. The sheer amount of plastics and materials that we are using once and disposing of, we simply cannot continue to do it in this linear way because resources are just running out. And you can sort of see here the difference between the linear economy and the circular economy on the left and the right. On the left-hand side, you can see take, make, use, waste. That is this single-use economy where something is made for single use, it's used once and chucked away. That generates this 10 kilos of waste per week per person because everyone is using something once and just chucking it away. On the other side of the spectrum is this more circular economy where things aren't used once and thrown away. They're recycled, they might be returned, they can be repaired, they can be reused, repurposed, and things actually get a whole lot more life out of them. And the important thing is things are made to be used more than once. Things aren't falling apart and breaking down after one usage. We want to have good clothes, for example, that can actually last you to wear them and actually be able to hand them down to the next generation versus a lot of the clothes that are made in sort of the fast fashion world that you can get for $5 at Kmart, and you put it through the washing machine once and it starts to break up. It's all about us moving towards this more circular economy. So our Step Up campaign is essentially how individuals can get involved in their community, get involved with local businesses, pressure local governments to adopt this more circular economy approach by leading with their own example. So there's a whole range of things that people can do. I would say the first things that come to mind is buying recycled stuff. We like to do a lot of recycling in Australia, and the truth is Australians on the whole are pretty good, not perfect, but pretty good at recycling stuff in terms of our recycling rates. The challenge is if we're not actually buying things that are made from these recycled materials, we're only doing half the job. That means buying, for example, paper that is used, made out of recycled materials. There's soft plastics like your chip packets and whatnot that can actually be melted down and turned into things like park benches and things like that you might see in your local park, depending on where your council, whereabouts you're based. There's a whole range of things that can be made from these recycled materials. And that's what we need to do because that then puts a value on it, on these resources in an economic sense. And businesses go, ooh, there's money to be made here. Let's actually improve our recycling infrastructure. Let's encourage people to recycle more. Let's make stuff out of this recycled stuff and give it a second, third, fourth, fifth life, as opposed to being in this linear economy where we're just making it once to be disposed of. So buying recycled, we think at Clean Up Australia is really, really important because that sends a message to businesses, to governments that we want stuff to be made out of recycled stuff. We don't want this single use, one time only affair. Composting is another big thing. Recycling your soft plastics. You can do that. You can separate out your soft plastics, which are basically all sorts of plastics that crinkle up and can be can be squashed down. So your chip packets, your chocolate bar wrappers, your plastic bags, the cling wrap, all of that sort of stuff, that is that soft plastic, that can be recycled separately. So don't put it in your landfill. You can recycle it at almost every single Coles and Woolworths. The vast majority of them have what's called a red cycle bin somewhere near the front of the store. So next time you go in, ask somebody at the local Coles or Woolies if they have a red cycle bin, because what you can do is you can separate that out. And that's a really important stream for us to get out of landfill, because we know those plastic bags just don't break down. So you can recycle them and they can get refashioned into stuff like park benches, bin enclosures, seating for stadiums, all sorts of pretty cool things, but you need to separate them out. Reducing contamination is another way that people can step up. As I said, people on the whole in Australia are pretty good at recycling, but there is a fair bit of what we call wish cycling, which is stuff that we hope is recyclable. So we put it in the recycling bin, but really it's not. And then what happens is, if there is enough contamination in that recycling bin, for example, there's stuff that isn't actually recyclable that's in there, that bin or that truck that picks up that contaminated stuff, if there is too much in there, it all has to go to landfill, essentially, because it's just too expensive or also technologically impossible for it to be separated out, the real recyclable from the non-recyclable. So for example, let's just say there's a bin that is 80% full of cardboard, cans, stuff that is genuinely recyclable, but there is that 10-20% of plastics or stuff that isn't recyclable in there. On a scale of one bin, you might be able to manually separate it out and get out all that goodies. But if you've ever been to one of these recycling facilities, the sheer volume of stuff that is coming in there, it's just not possible for them to separate it out. So if we really want to recycle better, we have to sometimes recycle less and actually only recycle in our bins what is actually recyclable. So different councils have different levels of technology. So this is a matter where people need to sort of do their own research by getting in touch with the council. I would say on the whole, councils are usually pretty helpful if you ask them what's recyclable, because they only want the right stuff to go in the bins too. So we have to step up and reduce our contamination if we want to really up our recycling game. And then cut out fast fashion is another way that you can get involved and step up and we get away from that overconsumption sort of lifestyle. Now here, I'm just going to quickly take the liberty to show this is part of our Step Up campaign. We ask people to make a pledge about what they're going to do to step up. And you can see here on our website, these are normal people. These people do not work for us. These are just normal, random Australian people who are stepping up, and they're writing on this little card what they're doing. You can see here, rinsing containers before recycling. That's part of cutting down on contamination. Metal straws, clothes swap, and well-made designer renting out her dresses so that their clothes aren't just taking up space in her cupboard. She's actually going to be sharing that around. You can see this dog here eating all the food scraps. That's reducing the amount of food waste. There's a whole heap of stuff that people are doing. So if you're ever stuck for inspiration or thinking, I don't know what I can do, come to this page and you can see a whole heap of stuff that people are doing to step up and reduce their waste themselves, which is great. And we love to see that. Now, in terms of what you guys might be able to do, whether that's in your churches, whether that's in your community groups, if your kids go to the Scouts or Girl Guides, whether you're involved in the P&C, whether it's your business at work, here are a couple of questions that I would just like to leave you with and get you thinking about in terms of how you can step up all around your community. The first is, what bins are there? Depending on the place, a lot of places may only have landfill bins, which means no matter how hard you try, if there's only a landfill bin there, you're really going to be struggling to cut down on your waste because you're not going to be able to get stuff in recycling. So what bins are there? Is there landfill? Is it recycling? Do you have a separate bin for bottles and cans? This is especially relevant, I think, with your church hats on, because this could be a way for you guys to raise money. If you can get the community to come together and donate to the church and use that money raised through the bottles and can refunds, you can use that to do all sorts of stuff. Schools have had a lot of success with this. We've worked with a lot of schools that sort of get all the parents to come in and drop off their bottles and cans. And if you think about how many people might be at a school or how many people might be at the church, and they all came in and dropped off 5, 10, 15 bottles or cans from that week, you could make a nice little bit of money. Again, composting and soft plastics, what's going on there? Next is, where are the bins and how many are there? This is a key question for littering. So depending on your situation may or may not be as applicable, but where are the bins? If there are not enough bins, or the bins are in random places where people actually don't meet and congregate, people will tend to just chuck stuff on the ground because the infrastructure just isn't there. So make sure your bins are in a logical place where the people actually are. And if you have multiple streams of bins, for example, like a landfill bin, a recycling bin, a bottle and cans bin, you should always try and put them next to each other. Don't put the landfill bin on this side of the room and the recycling bin on that side of the room and the bottles of cans over there, because what will happen is people will just put stuff in whatever bin's closest. Even if they want to do the right thing, there is just an element of laziness that is inherent in human nature that I'll just chuck it in that one because it's closer. Are the bins contaminated? Talked about this a lot before, but have a dig around in the bin, especially if you guys have any kids involved, whether that's through the Scouts, whether that's through the church, whatever it is. Get the kids and tell them they're allowed to tip the bin upside down and get their hands dirty and fiddle around in there and count what's in this bin. How much of it is actually coming from us? How much of it is coming from the community outside? And how contaminated is it? And which bins are full and which are empty, and why is that? This goes back to that placement question. If you find that one bin is always full to the brim and packed as, and one of them is completely empty, well, maybe you can think about rearranging them a little bit to help capture that waste a bit more. And lastly, where's the rubbish coming from? Is it coming from, for example, a canteen on the grounds? Is it part of your services or your activities that are generating the waste? Are people bringing waste with them when they come and then disposing of them there? Is it passers-by because your bins are outside and it's just random members of the community going for a walk? You need to have a bit of a think about what the rubbish is and where it's coming from so that you can best tackle it. And lucky last tips is to start at the source. As I said, this is the center of our Step Up campaign, is to stop the waste before it actually gets out into the environment, to really cut back on the amount of waste we're producing in the first place so that there is less litter to begin with, so that our environment is better to begin with. Be targeted and strategic. If you guys are embarking on some change, whether that be in your church, your home, your business, your community group, whatever it is, start small. Don't try and change everything overnight. What I would recommend is when you get those kids to tip the bins out, have a count of what the most common item in those bins are. Pick your top 2 or 3 and make a bit of a strategy to work on them. And then once you've got them under control, do it again and reassess. If you try and do everything overnight, you're going to have a bad time and you're going to feel like it's an impossible challenge and you can't overcome it. So start small. Incremental change is your friend in this. And you want to build on those wins and celebrate them and use that to push you on to the next one. And the last tip would be to build a green team. You can't do it yourself. As David was saying, you need to find those leaders and those role models, whether that's outside or inside, and have a group of people who are passionate and committed to doing it. It doesn't have to be a huge operation, just 3, 4, 5 people who are passionate about making that change and get some help to make those changes. Now, the lucky last key takeaways that I want to end with is that there are so many things to do that you can step up at and do. I mean, I just ran through a couple, but there are so many. Please just don't ever think that what you do as the individual doesn't matter. because these small step ups that you do, when they're combined together with everybody else, they do make a big difference. I mean, you think about how many people are in your church, how many people are in your kids' school, how many people work in your office, whatever it is. If you all start to make those small changes, it really does add up, and it becomes a bit of a movement. And the final quote is from this zero waste chef, which I saw you were talking about in the chat before. Zero waste chef, who says, "We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly. We all have a role that we can play to be those leaders, be those role models in our community, inspire others to do better, help them along the way, but don't be so precious about it. People are allowed to make some mistakes and not be perfect 100% of the time. If we all did it imperfectly, we would be in a much better place." So be inspired to do something, make a difference and step up in whatever way that it is, and you'll be able to make a bit of a positive change. So here's my details. Please feel free to take a photo, write them down, whatever. Give me a call, give me an email. If there is anything that we can do from cleanup's perspective, we would be more than happy to help them. And thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you so much, Liam. That's lots of great information about the Step Up campaign. I was impressed when you talked about organisations organising a project to collect all the recyclables. Up here in Queensland, we've got a Containers for Change program that the government sponsors, and one of our parishes has a collaboration with a Rotary club to collect people's and plastic bottles and use the funds to pay for projects. So that's a good model for others to copy. Thanks for all the comments from people, especially David. There was one question I heard from Mike about batteries and what's in place for us to be able to recycle batteries. And I do remember there being a link on the Step Up page for that. Have you got some information?
Yes.
To help Mike?
Yeah, so the e-waste is a big issue. I think, as you said, it's hugely growing. In the 5 years to 2019, e-waste increased 21% in terms of the stuff in people's bins. So it's hugely growing, which is just, I think, a marker of the technological advancements everyone now has, an iPhone and all sorts of gadgets and whatnot. So it's a huge growing stream. The challenge with e-waste is that it should not go into your landfill bin, because that has a whole range of negative impacts, and basically it just doesn't belong there. So there are a range of things to do. If it is a smaller item, like for example, it is a set of batteries or a light bulb or something like that, there are a range of places that do drop-offs. So for example, IKEA, Officeworks, Australia Post, places like that. You'll just need to do a bit of research to figure out where in your area does it. But I would say I know for a fact that those three do it: IKEA, Officeworks, and Australia Post. They do drop-offs for those smaller items, like a couple of batteries, a couple of light bulbs, things like that. On the mobile phone side, if you have an old mobile phone, one thing you can do is sell it on. So you can sell it to somebody else through, eBay, Facebook, whatever. Sell it on to somebody else or give it to someone. Alternatively, there's a crowd called Mobile Muster, who's been around for many years now. They work with Planet Ark, one of our friends in the environmental charity space. And they Mobile Muster, you can send your phone back to them and they can take of it and dispose of it properly. Because again, all this e-waste just needs to be dealt with separately from landfill. And then lucky last is if you have that bigger e-waste stuff. So for example, TVs, computers, radios, stuff like that, which won't fit in these little drop boxes at Australia Post. That's when you need to contact your council and they can arrange a pickup. Most councils do at least one, if not 2 or 3 e-waste days. So I know I'm from Penrith here in Sydney, and Penrith Council at this huge sort of Jamison Park sporting complex, they have this e-waste day, I'd say every 3 or 4 months, and the whole community comes together and you can dump off your computer, TV, batteries, whatever gizmos you've got, and council basically has one huge big skip bin for it, and it only accepts e-waste, and they take that skip bin and then they dispose of it through the proper e-waste channel. So your council might have an e-waste day, or they might be able to pick it up from your house, depending on how much you have. So those are a couple of different things depending on the exact item, but e-waste is a huge growing stream, and the key takeaway for e-waste is it just can't go in your landfill bin, because if it goes in your landfill bin, it messes up the other stuff. Some of it can actually explode and cause fires and whatnot because of the electrical components and the pressure that it gets pushed under in the back of the trucks and whatnot. So you have to, and also it has valuable metals and stuff in there that can be reused, even if the product itself is dead. Parts of the metals and whatnot can be burned down and reused. So we want to dispose of it through its own channel to be able to get some of that value out of it.
Okay, thanks for that, Liam. I know you said you're happy for people to follow up with you by contacting you for more information. I noticed Jill was having some trouble seeing the full screen, so I'm sure it'll be okay for us to share your contact details when we contact registrants after this webinar. And I'm assuming, David, you're the same if people want to follow up anything that you've shared with us today. So I want to say thank you to both Liam and David for spending some time with us and sharing with us some valuable information, and look forward to many people getting a few ideas about what they can do to create that circular economy, which Liam talked about. And I'm pretty sure Pope Francis specifically mentions promoting a circular economy in his encyclical on care for our common home too. So thank you both for that. Thanks also to my colleague Jess Laidler, who's responsible for setting up this webinar and for organising the registrations and so on. And Jess, I wonder whether you wanted to off mute and tell us what's going to happen after today in terms of sharing recordings and so on.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, Peter. So in about a day from the end of this webinar, you'll be sent a follow-up email that will have the recording link in it, and I'll also make sure to put in all the contact details for Peter, David and Liam. So you'll be able to contact them after the webinar. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Jess, for everything you've done to help make this possible. Once again, thanks to David and Liam, and thanks to all of you for taking time out of your busy days to listen in. I hope you look forward to checking out the recording when the link is sent to you, and more importantly, I hope that you've got lots of great ideas that you can follow up in your own community. Thanks, everyone. We'll sign off now.
Thank you.